Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. So we're going to be doing our Unit 4B review for the quiz tomorrow. Now, let's start with the first one, okay? I have h of x and I have k of x, and I'm asking you to state all of the x values for which these two things are equal to each other. So now I would be going to my calculator and checking to see where do the x and y values match. So I'm going to pull up the table. So you should be typing this in the calc. Alright, so by looking at my calculator, I see that the point intersects at 2, 8. But there are multiple x values. Notice the plural s for values. There are multiple values. So we're actually going to use our intersect function on the calculator. Notice how that's even a suggestion here. So in order for you to figure out what the other point is, we're going to go to second, trace, and then we're going to scroll to number 5, which is intersect. Now, you can't exactly see my calculator, but we're going to scroll over to where the other point is. So if I do second, trace, intersect, my graph looks something like this. Okay, we know that this point over here is 2, 8, and now we got to figure out that point. So when you do second trace on the calc, second trace 5, you'll see how it says first curve. You want to move the cursor all the way over to the point. You're going to click enter 3 times, and you will end up with the point negative 0.75, comma 1.125. But now the question asks for just the x values. So you're just going to give me the negative 0.75 and the 2. And those are the answers to this question. Alright, now we want to take a look at question number 2. Let's take a look at question number 2. I'm going to present this to you in 2 different ways. So we can either use master product with factoring, or I can also show you guys that shortcut we did today. So let's start with just regular master product. When I multiply the first term with the last term, I get negative 5x squared. I'm going to split this into what? We have to think, what are the two numbers that multiply to negative 5x squared but adds to negative 4x? So we should get negative 5x and positive 1x. So let's split the middle. I have x squared minus 5x plus 1x minus 5. And it says solve for the zeros, so I'm setting this equal to 0. Now, we want to factor out the first 2 terms and factor out the last 2. They both share an x, so take out the x, and they both share a 1, so take out a positive 1. You'll be left with x minus 5 equals 0. Now, we want to group our terms. I'm going to group my x and x plus 1, and I'm going to group my x plus 5's together. I'm left with x plus 1 times x minus 5 equals 0. I'm going to t-chart to solve for the zeros. I'll get x equals negative 1 and x equals 5. We just solved this by factoring by grouping. Okay, factor by grouping is this entire method, which you guys have seen time and time again, using our master product. So our answer would be negative 1 and 5 right there. Answer choice 2. All right, now I'm going to show you the shortcut method. So again, if you do not want to watch this part of the video, you can fast forward through this, but I'm going to show you the shortcut as well. This we just went through is master product, which we've been doing for a while now. All right, so let's take a look at the shortcut we did today. So we still need to look at the fact of our master product. Now we're just going to look at the negative 5 here, right? With our master product, you would have x squared minus 5 and then splitting the middle terms. But we're going to make this a little bit easier right now if you want to do the shortcut method. Again, if you don't, you can ignore this part of the video and fast forward. So we want to think, what's going to multiply to negative 5 but add to negative 4? So multiply to negative 5 but adds to negative 4. Negative 5 and positive 1. Because this is an x squared, there's a 1 out front. Because my a value equals 1, I'm allowed to use the shortcut method. It says solve for the zeros, so I should be setting this thing equal to 0. Okay, now, using the shortcut method from class today, remember how I said picture with dots? We would have our double set of parentheses, and we have the x out front of both sets of parentheses. All you're going to do is now fill in those spots with the negative 5 and the positive 1, and set it equal to 0. We kind of just skipped over the little intricate details in the middle when we use our master product to factor. We still get the exact same answer though. If I t-chart this, I'll still get x equals 5 and x equals -1. Again, giving me answer choice 2. So just to recap on this shortcut method, you look at the numbers that multiply to -5 but adds to -4. Once you have those two numbers, you're going to place them right after your x values and then t-chart and solve for x. All right, let's take a look at the next question. All right, so let's factor. It asks for you to factor. Notice how it doesn't say solve. If it doesn't say solve, you should not be setting this equal to 0. If you do this, this is wrong. Do not set it equal to 0. There's nothing to solve here. It just says to factor. Okay, so let's factor using our master product. I know I have -56x squared. Split it up into 2. You have to think, what are two numbers that are going to multiply to -56 x squared, but adds to +1x? So think about it. Okay, you have 8x and -7x, or you have -8x and +7x. Which of those is going to work? Think about it. Yep, first one actually, because 8x times -7x, 8x times -7x is -56x squared. When you add those two things together, you do get x. So let's split the middle. I have x squared plus 8x minus 7x minus 56. So we split the middle. Okay, great. Now you have to take out the GCF from the first two and last two terms. Factor out an x. You're left with x plus 8 inside the parentheses. Here I can factor out a -7, and hopefully I have the same exact thing inside the parentheses. If I don't, I probably did something wrong. My x minus 7s go together. My x plus 8s pair together. We're going to group. I'll be left with x minus 7 and x plus 8. Okay, and that's your final answer. We are done. This was done by using our master product, and we used grouping. We pulled out a GCF here, take out the GCF, and we grouped. Okay, great. All right, guys, so let's take a look at question number 4. All right, so number 4 says, what is the solution to the following equation? Well, guess what? We did a question like this in class already. Okay, so first things first, it says, what is the solution to this equation? Now, if we're going to do this by hand, okay, we have 4 times 2x plus 4 squared minus 8 equals 56. You cannot, and I repeat, I'm putting it in red, you cannot distribute the 4. You cannot distribute the 2. This is bad. You cannot distribute an exponent, and you cannot distribute the number out front. So we're going to scrap that. We can't do that. Okay? First thing you should be doing is adding 8 to both sides. You'll have 4 times 2x plus 4 squared equals 64. I'm going to divide both sides by 4. And I have 2x plus 4 squared equals 16. Okay, to get rid of this square, I'm going to square root both sides. I have 2x plus 4 equals plus or minus 4, because the square root of 16 is plus or minus 4. All right, give me a sec. I want to clean this up a bit. Okay, now let's split our answer. I have 2x plus 4 equals positive 4, and I have 2x plus 4 equals -4. Okay, subtract over the 4. We got to solve for x. And when we solve for x, we get x equals 0. That's one answer. Now we have to solve the other one. So we're going to subtract the 4. I have 2x equals -8. Divide both sides by 2. And I get x equals -4. These are my two solutions. So, now, guys, but listen. This is multiple choice. So this is how we would do all the work by hand. Use your calculator. I'll pull it up and see if I'm able to do it on here. Use your calculator. You should be setting this whole thing equal to what? It's a quadratic. Quadratics we set equal to 0. So if I wanted to, if I do this by my calculator, I should be setting this equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract over that 56. So I have 4 times 2x plus 4 squared minus 64 equals 0. You should be putting this into the calculator in y equals and seeing what the zeros are. When you find the zeros, when you graph this in the calc, this is a multiple choice question, so this is a strategy that you should be using. Get it equal to 0, put this in the calc as y equals, and you will find your zeros to be the exact same thing. If you were to look on your table, when x is equal to 0, y is 0, and when x is negative 4, y is 0. Here are your zeros. And done. All right, let's move on to the next question. All right, so number 6, I'm skipping 5 because we've actually done 5 in class before, so I'm skipping 5. If we look at 6, I give you the following graph. We have f of x equals negative 3x squared. I'm asking you which of the following is going to describe each of these transformations. So if I look, negative 3x squared, after it's translated up 1 unit, well, this has the plus 1 out front, so it's got to be g of x. Okay, if we look at the next one, I have f of x is translated now down 1 unit. It's got to be minus 1. So there's my h of x. And notice how both of these were outside the parentheses. Next one I have, it's going to be translated left. Careful with this. We do what's opposite inside the parentheses for left and right. So because this says go to the left 1 unit, we're actually looking at m of x. And then last but not least, by process of elimination, if we're going to the right, we take the opposite of what's inside the parentheses, so I'm looking at k of x. All right, hopefully that, clarifies how to translate your graphs. You guys also have a calculator. You don't need to memorize any of this. If I were you, and if this is multiple choice, I would be graphing all of these. Graph every single one of these and see what happens. When you graph negative 3x squared and compare it to negative 3x squared plus 1, tell me what happens. You would do the same for all 4 if this were multiple choice. All right, let's look at the next question. Number 7. Oh, I love this question. Okay, so we have a quadratic because we have an x squared. That's a quadratic. And it says solve the following quadratic function where h of x equals 0. So you see this h of x right here? It's telling us make it a 0. So I have 0 equals 3x squared minus 9x plus 6. I'm going to look to see if there's a GCF. I want to make this a little bit easier on myself. So I'm actually going to divide everything out by 3. And when I mean everything, I mean everything. 0 divided by 3 is just 0. I'm left with x squared minus 3x plus 2. Okay, now we have options here, guys. We've talked about this. You could either use quadratic formula. We could complete the square, or we can factor. Okay, it's all up to you, whatever you decide. If you decide to use quadratic formula, we have a equals 1, b equals negative 3, and c equals 2. All right, so let's actually do this by factoring. First, I want to clean this up a little bit. All right, so let's use our master product. Let's multiply these. I've got x squared times 2x. So I'll have 2x squared, and I've got to figure out what are the two numbers that are going to multiply to positive 2x squared, but is going to add to negative 3x. So we have negative 2x and negative 1x. Negative 2 times negative 1 is positive 2. Negative 2 plus negative 1 is negative 3, so this works out nice. We have to split the middle. So I have minus 1x minus 2x plus 2. We split the middle. All right, now I need to take out the GCF from the first two terms and take it out from the last two terms. So I see that in the first two terms they both share an x, and in the last two terms they both share a negative 2. So let's factor this out. We can take out the x, which will leave us with x minus 1. When I bring down the minus 2, I'll be left with x minus 1. These should match. What's on the inside should match. If it doesn't, we did something wrong. Don't drop that this also equals 0. Okay, now I can group them. I have x minus 2 with x minus 1. It tells you to solve. Because it says to solve, I need to t-chart and solve for x. I'll get x equals 2 and x equals 1. Because I want you guys to think about it. 2 minus 2 is 0. We want this whole thing right here. I'll highlight it. We want this whole thing to go to 0. And we want this whole thing to go to 0. So if I plug in x to be 2 for the first one here, if x plugs in to be 2, you get 2 minus 2 is 0. If I plug in for the second one here, x to be 1, 1 minus 1 is 0, and this works out. Okay, so my two solutions are x equals 2 and x equals 1. All right, let's move on to the next question. All right, so this question is actually really, really important. What you guys need to note, and please write this down, note this for yourselves. Whenever you see simplest radical form, immediately you should be using quadratic formula. Quadratic formula. If you see simplest radical form, do not try to factor. Okay? So let's write out the quadratic formula. We have x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. All right, so before we can even solve this quadratic, what do I have to get it set equal to? I have 2x squared minus 4x plus 5 equals 13. I want to get this thing set equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract the 13, get it equal to 0. I have 2x squared minus 4x minus 8 equals 0. Okay, great. Well, guys, look, there's a GCF. I'm going to take out a 2 from everything, make our lives a little easier. I'm going to take everything out and divide it by 2. I'm left with x squared minus 2x minus 4 equals 0. Again, do not try to factor this. Whenever you see simplest radical form, you should be using the quadratic formula. All right, so I'm going to clean this up a little bit, and we're going to use our formula. All right, so now I have my equation, x squared minus 2x minus 4 equals 0. We set it equal to 0 because it's a quadratic. I've got to write out what my a, b, and c values are. So I know a is going to be 1, b is negative 2, and c is negative 4. So I'm just going to plug into my formula, and here is what I have. I have negative 2. Anything that gets input into the equation has to have parentheses. I have negative 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 4 all over 2 times 1. Now remember what I said. I want you guys putting what's underneath the radical entirely into the calculator. Solely put that entirely into the calculator without the radical. And you end up getting 20 inside the radical. So I have x equals negative 2 becomes positive 2 plus or minus the square root of 20 all over 2. Now, you cannot divide the radical with the whole number outside. We have to put this in simplest radical form, hence the directions. Square root of 20 breaks up into the square root of 4 and the square root of 5. Well, the square root of 4 we know is 2, and the square root of 5 comes along for the ride. So I have x equals 2 plus or minus 2 radical 5 all over 2. I can simplify this. If I use my heart method, I can simplify the whole numbers out front without the radical. I am left with x equals 1 plus or minus 1 radical 5, or you can just leave your answer as x equals 1 plus or minus radical 5, and you are done. Both of these are acceptable, whether you write the 1 out front of the radical 5 or not. This will get you full credit. All right, so just remember, guys, when you solve a quadratic, get this thing equal to 0. Quadratics have an x squared always. Number 10 was from that stations activity we actually did in class, so I'm just going to quickly put up my solution here, and it is also on eBackpack, but I'm not going to really go through this too much. I'm just asking you to graph this, so I'm going to graph this in the calc, plot the points, graph this in the calc, and plot the points. When I ask you to solve a system of equations graphically, you have to find me the points where they intersect. So if you want to write this down for yourself, You have to find where they intersect and give me those solutions. So I'm just going to quickly plot my points in here. All right, and here is my final product for graphing both a quadratic and a linear function. You have two intersection points and you need to write both of those solutions. Don't forget to label your graph. Okay, again, when it says solve a system, you should be giving me the points where they intersect. All right, let's move on. Let's look at question number 11. So question number 11 says to solve a system algebraically. Okay, so our two methods for solving systems are what? You have elimination and substitution. So I'm going to do this by substitution. I have my regular y equals x squared plus 5x minus 10. And think about what we've done in class. We got y by itself. So I'm going to add both of these by 2x. I'll have y equals 2x plus 18. Since both of these things equal y, I'm going to substitute this in for y. So I will now have x squared plus 5x minus 10 equals 2x plus 18. How do I solve a quadratic? By setting it equal to 0. So let's do that. Let's get this side equal to 0. Okay? All right, now I have x squared plus 3x minus 28 equals 0. Okay, I'm going to use my master product. So I have negative 28x squared. I'm going to think, what are my two numbers that will multiply to negative 28x squared, but is going to add to 3x? So I'll get 7x, positive 7x, and negative 4x. So let's split the middle. I have x squared plus 7x minus 4x minus 28 equals 0. It says to solve a system, guys. So you've got to solve for both the x and the y's. It's a lot of work here. I'm going to divide out by the GCF. I'm left with x times x plus 7 minus 4 times x plus 7. I hope those things in parentheses match. All right, I'm going to clean this up and rewrite. So just give me a second. I'm going to erase this and rewrite this. All right, so I just rewrote this. I've got a group now. So the x plus 7s should match. They're inside the parentheses. And I'm left with the x minus 4. So I'm going to group these. I've got x minus 4 times x plus 7 equals 0. You have to t-chart. I'm going to t-chart. I'll have x minus 4 equals 0 and x plus 7 equals 0. When you solve for x, you should get x equals positive 4 and x equals negative 7. But now we're not done. You need to solve the system for both x and y. If you remember before, we solved y and got it by itself and said y equals 2x plus 18. I'm going to use the linear function because that's just easier for me to work with personally. I don't want to bother with the quadratic. When I plug in x to be 4, 4y, what do I get? Good. You get y equals 26. So that's one answer. Over here, you're going to plug in for when now x is negative 7. When you plug in x as negative 7, what do we get for y? Good. You should get, should get 4. Yes, should get 4. Okay, now I've solved this system and we're done. All right, guys, we are almost done. So if we look at question number 12, I give you volume is equal to 1/3 pi r squared h. I want to get h by itself. In order for us to get h by itself, I'm going to first multiply both sides by 3 to cancel that 1/3. All right, I now have 3v equals pi r squared h. And we're getting h by itself, so this is nice and easy. We're going to divide out by pi r squared, divide out by pi r squared, and I'm left with h equals 3v all over pi r squared. And we're done. That's it. So my answer is, let's see, answer choice 4. All right, let's finish this up. We are almost done. All right, guys, so just to save us some time, a question like 13 it's a multiple choice question. There's a question just like this on your test. You should be putting this into the calculator. Graph this. Get all 4 of these answer choices set equal to 0. So your first answer choice should really be x plus 3 squared minus 2 equals 0. Your second answer choice will look like x minus 3 squared minus 2 equals 0, etc. You should be setting these things equal to 0 and graphing them. Whichever graph matches the one that you have, that's your answer. And by doing this out, if you actually do this by completing the square, I'll show you this as well. You should end up getting x equals -7 and x equals 1, which ends up being answer choice 4. Those two things both match. All right, so let's finish this up. Question number 14, we're going to solve this by completing the square. So I have x squared plus 6x minus 13. There will be a question like this tomorrow. When you complete the square, we've got to get that c term to the other side. So I have x squared plus 6x plus a blank space, or a box, is equal to 13 plus that blank space. Now, when we complete the square, we're going to have our b term. So have the b term and square it. Have the b term and square it. This whole thing becomes this right here. Okay, that whole thing is this. Okay, now I'm just going to combine the right-hand side. Oops. I will be left with 22. To get rid of a square, we have to square root. So I'm going to square root both sides. I have x plus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of 22. I'm going to subtract the 3 over, and I'm going to be left with x equals -3 plus or minus the square root of 22, and we are done. This is solving by completing the square. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave me feedback. Make sure you like and subscribe. All right, good luck on your quiz.